Hi, this is Michael Lake. I'm with altobone.com. And given everything that's going on in the world these days, it's certainly understandable that you might have forgotten that today was supposed to be ASU Trombone Day. And I feel bad. Brad worked very hard on putting that together and getting a lot of things lined up, but it was not meant to be this year. But I called Brad yesterday and I said, maybe I can provide something in the virtual world to kind of give us a sense of Trombone Day. We're certainly getting used to virtual events. And I have some interesting contribution to make to this because for the last 6 months, I've been conducting interviews with great jazz players. And this was long before the virus hit and kind of turned our world virtual. This is a virtual event that I'm creating called Jazz Master Summit. And it's for a week of interviews. So Monday it's these interviews, Tuesday these. And it's famous jazz players and jazz educators of all instruments, kind of extracting from them their musical gifts and greatness and what is special about their abilities and really diving into the music. So what I thought I would do is, of the 3 trombone players that I interviewed, and by the way, I'm going to continue to do interviews with more. Fred Wesley and I have been in conversation. He's not quite ready to do this, but I'd like to get Conrad and others. But for now, I've got 3. I've got Jim Pugh, Bob McChesney, and Bill Reichenbach. Now, we were all looking forward to Bill Reichenbach, right? So I've conducted interviews with these guys, long hour-and-a-half interviews, and we dive deep into a lot of different topics. But I extracted some interesting excerpts. So I strung them together for you, and we've got about an hour. So maybe we call this trombone hour, virtual trombone hour, okay? And I think you'll enjoy the excerpts that I've chosen. And I've added a bonus, which is Randy Brecker. Now, don't hold it against him just because he plays trumpet. But I started the interview with him because I read a snippet that he originally wanted to play trombone. I thought that was hilarious. So we talk a little about that in the very beginning. And then I also gave you a segment where we talk about his composition process for the great tune he wrote, Some Skunk Funk, for the Brecker Brothers Band. So, and then at the very end, I'm going to throw in something Gerry Pagano and I did last summer. We were able to get into the Earth Science Laboratory in Tucson called Biosphere 2. And we got into the lung and brought my recording equipment, and we recorded for a few hours down there. Now, you got to realize the lung has a reverb time of 24 seconds. 25, I don't know, but it's long. And you can't not love 25-second reverb if you're a trombone player. So I gave you a little bit, my very short little intro, and then I let you hear Gerry play a little Wagner helped by that reverb. So all in all, I think I'm giving you close to an hour, and I'm hoping that Brad and I can kind of give you a trombone hour here virtually. And then next year, I'm counting on all of this blowing over to the point where we can then get together again. Brad can do his magic to bring in a great player, get us all together and do this in person. If you want to learn more about my Jazz Master Summit, go to altobone.com, put your email in there, and you'll get notifications. Plus, I'm sending out lots of these types of excerpts. Obviously, not all trombone players, but lots of excerpts, so you'll get into that. So, without further ado, here's Virtual Trombone Hour. Let's talk about a little background. You attended Eastman. You studied with Emory Remington.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about what those early lessons were like. What were you like as a student of Remington's?
Well, let's see. I was pretty, I mean, it was almost like a religious experience, really. I kind of had come from studying with one of his students, Bob Isley, who had studied with him in the late 30s before he went into the Marine Band as the soloist. And then I went right to Remington, and it was the same, we were playing the same music, but here was this guy that I had been hearing about all along and knew kind of his reputation. And And so it was almost like, now we're starting with Remington. It was kind of like, now let's relax down into this real simple, let's start with middle F and kind of get a good sound and breathe into the horn. And so he really talked about making it very vocal and making the trombone into a vocal sound. And Bob Isley played that way and he didn't talk about it much. He just played that way. So I copied him. So going to Remington was sort of a natural progression.
Okay, so let's go into the proverbial equipment talk because I know people want to hear this.
Okay.
So what's your go-to bass trombone these days?
I have a Greenhoe. I have three of them, but I have a Greenhoe made by him back before Schilke bought the company. And it's a red brass bell. It's a little thicker than their standard bell, just a little bit. And it's got an all red brass slide, including the end crook, which is a little different version than their stock slide, which has a silver end crook. So it's a couple of different variations. It's the combination feels good to me. But then again, Gerry sent me during the course of the years, he sent me an experimental all nickel bass trombone that, except for the fact that it's inline, which is not my favorite version of the trigger system, it's all nickel. So I can mix and match the slides. And I've actually used that all nickel slide on the heavy red brass bell that I've got quite a lot. And it does some other stuff. And you one thing has a benefit and then you miss something else that the other one, it's like never gonna be perfect. But last week was the NAMM show, and Michael Zielinski was out here with the Schilke company, and they're making a mouthpiece of mine now, which I worked on for a while with them, and he's gonna make me an experimental slide that's gonna be nickel with a dark red brass end crook, which is the opposite from there, just to see what that end crook does. It might sort of do, because I like what the nickel slide does with the pedal notes, but it'd be, so it's kind of, he's willing to make that leap to try. So we're going to see how that works.
The nickel slide, is that a heavier slide weight-wise?
No, I don't notice the weight being different. They're all slide tuning, so they're a little bit heavier slides than a lot of people want to play. But you get used to that. I've played a con with slide tuning for years, and I just got used to it.
Okay.
But I don't think it weighs less.
Okay. What's your go-to tenor?
My tenor is a real early New York Box 6 bell with a 16M slide on it. You can mix and match the slides on the Bach bells. They all have the same receiver side up to a certain point. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe above a 16, that it's not, maybe, I'm not sure if that fits anymore, but all those little sizes, which they had back 6, 8, 12, and 16, you could rearrange all the slides and the bells. Mm-hmm. So the bore size is a little bit, it's like I think it's a 508 or 509 bore, and the bell is, of course, this New York bell that I have, which is like a 300 serial number. It's from the 1933 or something like that, and so it might be different than later. I have 3 or 4 different 6 bells, but that one is the one that I use all the time. And there's something about the way I play tenor trombone that horn can kind of like it for rock and roll playing and for jazz section playing, if I do that, which is not very often anymore, that works good for me.
And do you play a bigger mouthpiece on your tenor?
Well, I play like around a 6.5 AL size mouthpiece.
Okay. And well, I guess I should ask about your go-to contrabass trombone.
Yeah. Well, the contra that I have is a Haag, Haag, made in Switzerland, right near the border of Switzerland and Germany. And I played one of those at one of those trombone festivals that was over in Austria. I think that's where it was. and I didn't even have a contra mouthpiece. I played it with my bass trombone mouthpiece, and it felt so good. It felt like just a big bass trombone that I started thinking about that horn and telling my friends about it. And a couple of years later, like back then, there was the dollar, and before the euro, it was like francs and German marks and all that. And the dollar got real strong. And the price went from, when I looked at it, it would have cost about $9,000. This was years ago. It would have cost about $9,000. And then all of a sudden the dollar got real strong, and you could get one of them for somewhere in the ballpark of $6,000. So 4 of us bought them. So they delivered a huge trunk to the bottom of my street. I had to go pick it up in my car to get it, because they couldn't bring the truck up in front of my house. It was like the size of a refrigerator with rope handles on the end, and it had 4 of those in it. 3 of us were here, and so between the 3 of us, we all picked out the horns we liked, just without any argument. And the person that was left took the one that was left, which was still fine. They were all great, but that's the horn that and I've tried other horns, and I don't know that I found anything that plays better than that. I've made a mouthpiece with Doug Elliott that I really like, right. And that works out. I don't practice contrabass trombone a lot, so if I have a session coming up, knowing that I have to play contra, I'll try to play it for a couple of days before, just to kind of get back into blowing it properly, and then hopefully over the course of the job, I'll settle down into it so that it starts to feel a little more natural. I know that some of the guys in Europe play it all the time, and they sound ridiculous. I've played with some of those guys knowing those things, and they've played contrabass trombone like it's the only horn they play. It takes me a little while to get into it to that extent, but I like playing it.
Yeah, well, you sound awesome on it.
Well, I'm lucky.
I don't think quite so much luck.
No.
If we talk about diversity now, do you have a go-to alto beside what's on your lap?
Oh yeah, well let's see. I think the alto that I used on that Giraud album, High Crime, I think that was a Minnick. Okay. I also had a Bach, which I sold, and now I have a Con that's got the trigger, but I haven't really played alto much for years. I've played this valve one a couple of times.
Can we see that?
Oh yeah, this is the, yeah, let's see, I'm looking to see what's the best way to see it. Yeah, this is, so this is about late 1860s or 1870. You can see some real unusual, how the tubing goes through this. They were experimenting with a lot of stuff. Valves were kind of a new thing. Even they were maybe only 30 years old by that time, and Con was experimenting all the time with stuff. And this is a pretty good horn. I have the matching tenor trombone with valves, and it's not a good horn. Maybe that just happens to be that horn, but this horn I'm very lucky to have. And when I was actively collecting horns, this one came up, and I thought, alto valve trombone, well, yeah, and so I used it on a Claire Fisher's a recreation of some Claire Fisher charts where he actually wrote for alto valve trombone.
Oh my God.
So I went in after they had recorded the band, and his son Brent was putting it together, and I just put the alto valve trombone parts on it. He says, "You want to play a solo on that?" And I thought, well, I could try, and so I think that's the horn that I played the solo on. I also have another Con horn that looks like a big cornet. It's an alto. They call it a solo alto horn. It looks like a big cornet. It's like that, instead of like that size, it's like that. And this is I usually use this mouthpiece on that. And that's a little bit newer than this. That's about 1890. And that's probably one of the best brass instruments I've ever played.
Huh. At what point did you become proficient on valves?
Well, after I had been playing for about a year, my parents bought this $15 crappy trumpet for my younger brother. once one of a series of instruments that he half-heartedly messed around with for a little while until he decided he wanted to be a singer and an artist. So I had the benefit of having that instrument, so I sort of got the beginning trombone books out that always are written for trombone and baritone. And I just learned the fingerings for the notes out of that as if I was playing baritone horn. So I thought of it concert, B flat, bass clef, transposed up an octave on trumpet, just to learn the notes, to learn the scale and stuff. And over the years, I played a lot of air valves, walking the dogs. And I used to walk my dog and I would listen to melodies, and I would try to before I'd start messing with valves, I'd try to figure out chromatically what some of these melodies that I heard in this big concert band that I played in, having no idea what note they started on or anything, and just chromatically figured them out. So I was kind of teaching myself how to play by ear out on the street. And then I'd go home and try it, and I'd learn something, like I had gotten that chromatic move wrong or whatever it was. I wasn't quite locked into how the horn was set up. And then I started with the valves, and I was able to do it with a little less, this kid's crazy walking down the street doing this with his dog, you know what I mean? It was just like some little moves. And I still do that. I'm kind of like playing stuff usually with valves. I'm in the car doing that, and my wife says, "You're playing bebop again, aren't you?" We're driving, and I'm like playing on the steering wheel. I can't avoid it.
I caught a comment you made that said, if you had been something like more serious about the jazz portion of your bass trombone playing earlier on, you felt you'd be, your words, a more natural jazz player?
Yeah. Well, it took me a long time to sort of tie the two together. In a way, I kept them separate. Like bass trombone was kind of like as close as I was ever going to get to being a legit player. Oh. And when I played tenor trombone, it was the other style. And look, I didn't take lessons on tenor trombone really much after I got into high school. It was all bass trombone when I started studying with Bob Isley. So like that stayed separate, even into Eastman. I went into Eastman as a bass trombone major. And then when all of the jazz stuff started there, which it kind of started when I was in school there was no program, but they had a jazz ensemble. And so I ended up playing lead in that band for a couple of years. So it sort of forced me into doubling in a certain, to a certain point. And the bass trombone was never, the opportunities for playing jazz on bass trombone still hardly exist unless a person wants to create their own. So yeah. I never tied the two things together until quite a bit later. When I was on Buddy Rich's band, I played some jazz on bass trombone after he found out that I could, and he would let me stand up and solo like on the Basically Blues. He'd open that tune up and I'd go out and play, and I think it was a novelty for him. I'm sure it was. And then it wasn't until the ITA convention in Urbana, Illinois, years later, that I got hired to, they asked me to come and play, not hired. They asked me to come, they don't hire anybody, but they asked me to come and play, and I'm looking at the lineup, and it's Bill Watrous and Mike Davis and all these super tenor trombone players. And I thought, well, hey, maybe I'll just take the bass trombone. And it was the first time I ever kind of tied myself to that. And I played this little, whatever we all played, like 15-minute sets with the rhythm section. And the response was kind of like, I had just demonstrated the cure for cancer or something on stage. I was blown away with the response. I was just playing tunes and blowing a little bit. And so that kind of started me doing that. I thought, well, why fight this? This is what I really play. I may as well try to get better at it.
Yeah. For a studio player at this time, this date, versatility is part of your gig, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Stylistic and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, stylistically, I'm just thinking also the instruments, I don't think you can get away with thinking you're going to be a studio player if all you play is tenor.
No, they assume. I mean, just to show you how far it's gotten, they now assume that tenor trombone players can all play bass trombone and fairly well. And sometimes they expect them to bring contrabass trombones. So now a lot of the tenor trombone players have bought some of these kind of entry level contrabass trombones that they can come in and play. I mean, I'm not quite sure that I agree with orchestrating that way, where you've got 4 contrabass trombones in the section. It's hard to tune all of those pedal notes like that. They sometimes, you cancel each other out sometimes, you know. But they do expect bass trombone players to play contra now pretty regularly without much fanfare, you know, like, oh yeah, bring the contra. So, oh, you better have one, you know. And or sometimes Chimbasso has entered into it a little bit, which is Chimbasso is just a valve contrabass trombone. But it took a little while to convince them of that, because that comes from the tuba player's chair usually, and so Tommy Johnson, the great tuba player, was kind of promoting the Chimbasso for years, and he kind of made that a studio thing, you know. And so the orchestrators would be like, well, can you play Chimbasso? Well, yes, I can, but I don't have one, and I don't necessarily want to go borrow one. I can play it on contrabass trombone, probably more in tune because of the slide, you know. And so you know, back when I was doing the bit, in the previous version of The Simpsons, when it was like a 40 or 45 piece orchestra every week, and Alf Clausen was writing for it, I started doing that show maybe the last 5 years of it. And I was playing tuba and bass trombone. That was the seat. That was regular every week. And one week they called up and they said, he wants you to play Chimbasso. I said, well, you know, and I didn't want to go find a tuba player and borrow a Chimbasso. I said, well, I don't have a Chimbasso. I can play it on contrabass trombone. And they said, we'll get back to you. So, so they hired somebody else. They hired a tuba player that had a Chimbasso, who probably didn't play very much bass trombone. He might have played just a little. And so that wasn't necessarily the experience that they were looking for. So the next time they called up with the Chimbasso, I said, if you like, I'll talk to Alf myself and explain the difference between the Chimbasso and the contrabass trombone. And once I talked to him about it, he says, oh, well, just bring that then. It was as simple as that, you know. Okay, well, so that's, you know, I mean, a Chimbasso is a giant expense, you know. You're 15 grand or something like that. And, you know, if I played it between now and the end of my career, if I played it 4 times, I'd be lucky, probably. So I don't want one.
Is it assumed a tenor player has to play alto?
Not necessarily, but every once in a while it comes up. And some of the guys that are more like legit type players, or have at least a legit grounding, play alto. Alex Isles plays alto. Bill Booth plays alto.
Well, like I said to you, I got a lot of feedback from people when I said, you know, give me a question, and it all really comes down to finding out what your secret sauce is for playing so well. So maybe a first question is, in the beginning, do you think you had some sort of advantage or did something that kind of got you off on a really good track, whether it's fundamentals or whatever it might be, to kind of get you to being in a position to play really well?
Well, yeah, I think I was really lucky at having had incredible teachers along the line. Because I started playing, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia when I started playing. And I remember my very first teacher was a French horn player. Within a little while, he told me I needed to get with a real trombone player. And at that time, the main teacher, or the sort of the best teacher in Atlanta, was a man by the name of William Hill. He was teaching at the University of Georgia. So I was studying with him at a very young age, probably, I guess, like 6th grade, 7th grade, studying with him. And then my family moved back to the Pittsburgh area, and I studied with a guy there by the name of Andy Shiner, who was also incredible. They're all of them were different teachers, and then went from Maddie to Remington. So there was this very nice flow of pretty incredible teachers. I think Bill Hill and Remington were more the orchestral. Matty Shiner was coming from the viewpoint. He was, well, I guess coming out of the Arthur Pryor line of lineage to some degree. He had been in the KDK radio orchestra, like back in the day when they had radio orchestras and that kind of stuff. So he was actually the kind of player that's sort of lost today. I think there's like, you have orchestral players and you have jazz players, but there used to be this sort of classification of player in the middle that were like ferociously virtuosic players. Again, I think coming out of the Arthur Pryor vein, but not improvisers, but they were playing on small equipment. So you think of like a lot of the studio players in the 50s and 60s. If you get down to like I don't know, like the Lloyd Ulyates and Hoyt Bohannons and Tommy Pedersons, if you're thinking in LA. I'm thinking if you go to New York, you start thinking about Charlie Small and those kind of players. There were just astounding players of the instrument, but they weren't orchestral players, nor were they, what you think, maybe they were very basic improvisers, but you don't think of them as jazz players at all. And he was, I think, coming from that. So there was a whole lot of study with him on a whole lot of work on flexibility, a whole lot of work on articulation, double tongue, triple tonguing. This is sort of before doodle tonguing was part and parcel of our vocabulary as much. But it was all, a lot of it was very technically driven. And he had been like buddies with Dorsey. I remember when he telling me stories like when Dorsey would come through town, Tommy would call him up and they'd get together and play duets and stuff, So it was really coming out of that, like I said, the small horn virtuosic player that I'm not saying that the people certainly in the orchestral and the jazz side are all virtuosic players now, but that slot in the middle of people that didn't profess to be improvisers nor orchestral players, sort of is gone. It's like you sort of have to go one way or the other now.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about high range. What's Jim Pugh's tips for developing and maintaining the high range?
Okay, that's actually fairly. So I've got a scale routine that actually has become sort of a lifelong routine because it doesn't have to be just scales. That basically it starts out from a warm up. Matty Shiner had a warm up that basically started like a middle F, like fourth line F, and would go like a whole note, similar to Remington's. I mean, Remington's has sort of taken over the world, like the B flat A, B flat G, B flat F, and so on from there. Some people do it chromatically. I think Bill and I were there in an era where it started out as a chromatic, and by the time Bill and I were there, Remington was 80, and he'd gone to diatonic, I think, to shorten the exercise a little bit. So we learned it diatonically. Earlier students learned it chromatically, but and just whole notes. But Matty Shiner had one that was like, it started on F and then went to E, to G, to D. It kept going out from that middle F. So it kept getting higher and lower so that you always offset the high note with a relaxation note. So as it's getting more work here, it's also the next note you play actually relaxes things. So anyway, I don't use that. I gravitated finally towards Remington for the long tone thing, but I use that same sort of model of Matty Shiner's for scales. So starting out like say if we're just doing major scales, like an F scale up and down, then I'll go to E, but I'll go up to like the second ledger line E and do that down and up. And then I'll go up to F sharp, up and down, and then E flat, down and up. And so pushing it out this way. So by the time, if you go the full octave on that, by the time you get to the end of it, you're doing a scale up to high F and down to low F. But you're always offsetting. The thing is, the scale that has the work or the high note in it is like the next one you're going to play is going to be the low one. So I found it's a really good way to keep not only an upper register, not only to build an upper register, if that's the goal of whatever point you are developmentally, or in my case, like trying to keep the upper register intact, but also not at the expense of the low register, because you're always balancing them off back and forth. I've just sort of seen that it sort of creates like a more organic upper register where it's not. Again, you can do exercises that will specifically address the upper register, like think, oh, play ballads up there or play whatever, do stuff. But if you stay up there almost exclusively, you're going to start thinning out the low register, or the low register is going to get trickier. And I always like the way this like offset one against the other, so that you work, then you relax, then you work and relax, and work and relax. And then once that gets comfortable, I go back. I mean, you could keep pushing it from that point, but I'll go and do the same thing, but starting like a low B flat, doing 2 octave scales. So that you do B flat, then you start high A and do a descending, then B ascending, A flat descending. By that point, if you complete the octave on that, you're up to like a double high B flat and a pedal B flat. So it's like now you've stretched that, and for those that gets too easy, then you come back to F and do that starting at low F and 3 octaves, So, but it's like you keep stretching it out. But I found that I take myself and students through all the scales, all the modal scales, all the jazz scales, all the modes of the melodic minor, diminished, whole tone, augmented scales, harmonic majors, modes of harmonic major, all that kind of stuff. Then arpeggios, you can do it, do the whole thing with 7th arpeggios, and then doing inversions. I mean, it's become sort of a lifetime exercise. You can always find things to plug into it and then do that way, so that it's almost as, I'm sure you found this too, as you get, particularly once you get out of school, and life impinges on everything you do, it's like there's times when you have to look at ways to make your practicing as efficient as possible sometimes. And the nice thing about that exercise is like you're not only working and either keeping or building or maintaining, embouchure control over the entire breadth of the instrument, but you're also working on, say, some scale that's not comfortable, or some harmonic pattern, something that you're plugging into that's so you're working on that at the same time you're working on your chops. So it's not, it's trying to find exercises that do more than one thing, which I guess in some ways they all do, but this one sort of very specifically does that. But it's one exercise I've lived with for many, many years, and will probably until this is all over.
Well, I think that could be a book for you. It's the Jim Pugh stretch method of range. So when I think of your playing, the things that come to mind is accurate, quick articulation, intonation, great locked-in intonation, and obviously speed. Let's talk a little about articulation and the light articulation. You and I have had conversations about how important that is for you. So maybe talk a little about what you hear for yourself is important in that kind of quick, accurate, light articulation. Okay. And I'm not even really talking about the doodle yet. I'm just talking about the overall producing of the note.
Okay, yeah, I've always felt that if I was going to play the trombone, I had this image of like a young child sitting in front of me saying, "Wow, what is that? It's a trombone. Could you play something for me?" And I always felt like, well, they didn't know quite what it was. It's not a trumpet or a sax. I want to play it so that it sounds really elegant and pretty and simple and accurate, so that the child could hear the melody, the song, and what I was playing, as opposed to, let me just knock you over the head with this slam blasting thing that might have rough edges on it or whatever. It's just been my nature to try to present something that is as clean and simple and accurate, that also would translate in the listener's mind to another instrument. Like they would, after I started playing, it wouldn't necessarily sound like a trombone or a trumpet or anything. It would just sound like clean, accurate music to them, and the trombone wouldn't be the issue. And that is one of the things that I think all trombonists are trying to overcome, because it's a difficult instrument. We don't want it to be, well, here's all these instruments, and then there's trombone, and you got to forgive all this inaccuracy. I always tried to make it like it just felt like just another instrument, equally tender, beautiful, simple, accurate, happy birthday, really clear, nothing. So that's sort of the approach that I've always had. So that just requires a little more attention to detail, not just getting the note out, but how when I went from this note to that note, was it elegant? Did it sound like when I went from the other note to the other note, did they all kind of match? Do I sound like I'm an art? Can you hear the diction in my speech? Can you hear clarity? Or are you hearing kind of muddled speech or whatever? And I always just thought, like, just to spend a little extra time to make it beautiful, because I think intelligibility is a type of beauty, and it's just something that I want to take the time with, so that note will translate, the notes I'm playing will translate to the audience, so that if I have a really nice line or a melody to play, that it's just, you're not thinking about, oh wow, he's really overcoming these jumps on the instrument or the articulation, but they just hear the melody simply. It may not be that simple to get to that level, but I just want it to sound nice and easy. Aren't the greatest musicians that we listen to, like you listen to Freddie Hubbard or Wynton or somebody, doesn't it just sound like, or Cannonball Adderley? They could play anything. It's just effortless then for them to play. They give you that sense. Now, maybe it isn't for sure. They've worked on things, but I wanted to give that elegant, I'm just having a good time here, effortless. I can just play anything I want and it's going to all come off. So that's sort of my emotional attitude to practicing and performing, that I want to translate that feeling of even if I'm playing loud and aggressive, right? It still has to be a sense of like, this is not difficult, because it sounds just really accurate and so am I getting that? It's hard to put into words.
Yeah. Well, let me challenge your words a little more by saying, if somebody's watching and they would like to get from where they are now, which is more of a blatty articulation, to something that's more of a ta, any thoughts that you might share that may help them get on that path?
Well, a lot of times I use like a control with my students. I'll have them play what they think is a really nice note at a certain volume, ta, ta, ta. And let's say they're trying to play louder, then I'll say, now play that note, but make it sound like that, louder. Or play 3 of these notes this way, but now play 3 of the other note. But can you hear that you're separating your notes here? Like, for example, da, 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 da. Sometimes you'll hear a student play da, 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 beautiful 3 legato notes, and then they go, pa, 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 when they try to change notes. So you always have that control. If there's a figure, da, 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 I'll have them play it on 1 pitch or down low or something that I know they can accomplish. Da, 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 da. Now they have to play ba, ba, da, ba, ba. Oh wow, you don't sound like that anymore. And so having a control can relax you. Control by taking out the different pitches or eliminating the rhythm or eliminating the range problem or whatever, can get someone to think about how easy something should actually be sounding. It should sound as easy as when you're not doing the other thing. So I have in all my exercises in my books, I always have some kind of control, a starting point that I try to anyway. And I think that can relax you back into focus, to get that sense of ease back into your sound,
It's kind of like, you know, hearing your development, it's kind of like you grew up in a foreign country and just absorbed the language. And now the rest of us adults are going to school trying to learn the language, and it's harder. And,
Well,
and for people that want to know, this is the product of your reverse engineering. And, you know, one of the questions I had, because I can imagine there are people that have bought the book and it didn't come quickly, it didn't come easily, and then maybe they put it away. So maybe a question to you is, what do you see as the biggest initial challenge people have that they need to kind of get over that hump with?
Okay, that's a great question. I see two different areas. First is the physical syllables that tend to be understated by a lot of players. They're not articulating strong enough. So you hear and it's mumbly. They're not separating the notes and making them sound as if they were single tonguing. So again, I have that control in there where I have them go da 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 da, and the hump is not all players, but many of them. You hear this weakness. You hear da 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 da, mush, no separation in the notes. Part of that is they have to be careful not to single tongue when they're doodle tonguing and go da 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 da, or to use the syllables wrong. But if they're actually doing a to and fro smooth motion the way it needs to be done, they need to be able to separate those notes. If you can get over that hump, then you just need a real evenness to your practice. You need to feel like it's constantly under control. I feel that the tongue is the way better controller than the lip break. When you're dependent upon the lips to do turns and crossings, there's a dependency upon exactly when that point is going to be, when the slide has to be there and the lip is just ready to break and whatever. So there's a lot of variables to get the notes to lock exactly and have that kind of control. But when you put the tongue on it, oh my God, it just feels like the tongue is the master. So when you're practicing, you want to keep all your syllables really separate and even. Doodle, 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 doodle. It's like a punching bag on those notes all the time. And they're not uneven. They're not different rates or different strengths. They're always like bam, 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 bam. And that's what gives that overall sense. The second hurdle is, now that you've got that, you're most of the way there. It's going to take time to internalize the syllable patterns that involve crossing down over partials. You know, and I mean, in any little line, da ba da ba da, there could be a little crossing in there, or whatever. That takes time, and each pattern that you want to play, you have to adapt the syllables to that pattern. And learning these things, even when I learn something new, it doesn't take me very long, but it takes a little second to adapt the articulation to the music. So that is the second hurdle. That may take time. If you can get, but the main physical hurdle is getting those syllables to speak and separate. And I hear that is the most common problem that I hear, is like an understated kind of tonguing. Maybe the second is that unevenness. They can't do it for a long, you should be able to go for a really long period of time without feeling a disruption in the rhythm. For me, doodle tonguing is easier. It's like the drummer, you're handing him the second stick for the first time. It just becomes like there's much less effort involved in with the one stick. You know, it just becomes easy, but you got to have that clear separation. Once they get over that hurdle, it's just a matter of practicing rhythms and then adapting those crossing patterns. You know, da 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 da. All those downward crossings. I call it the ah syllable, but that syllable is really just a placeholder for not tonguing when you cross down over a partial. Da da. I got my horn here. I can show you in a second.
Yes.
We all play this way when we play a roshu, right? We'll make a da da da. Well, I could tongue that note, the crossing down, but it doesn't help, and it's kind of an unnecessary movement that has to be synced up exactly with so it's better to let some of these natural crossings they do a better job than you trying to put an ul or a la syllable on them. So then you have to accommodate multiple crossings in a row, and when they're what beats they're on, so they line up with the doodle patterns and things like that. I think a lot of my fans understand this. They've seen me talk about this before. It just takes the internalization, the clear separation and evenness, and then the time to internalize your material, whatever it is, whether it's a legit piece or a jazz, your jazz improvisations. They all have to be internalized with those syllables to the point where you're not, like when I perform, I don't think about syllables at all. I'm trying to come up with what I hear musically when I play, and I don't associate it with what articulation. But if I mumble something, oh, that didn't sound clear, then all of a sudden my attention might go back on that. Your focus is totally on the music. In the practice room, maybe you're sorting that out, but there's not a lot of conscious effort in that area anymore because of the work that I've done over a long period of time. There's a little bit on something new, like, oh yeah, that feels good, but it's not, it's mainly about, oh, what's the interval, what's this pattern I'm trying to do that it's all new to me, it's hard. I don't know what the notes are, and that's where my focus is. And then as I get faster, those leaps start to go all the das and ahs and la. They fall into place kind of as I'm learning. Does that make sense? I'm trying to reverse the feeling of what for people that are trying to learn the technique.
Yeah, it does make sense. It's easy for you because, again, you're fluent in the language. So, to learn a new sentence takes no time at all. Randy Brecker, this is really a treat, and that's an understatement for me, man. You have been a real inspiration to me, even though I'm a lowly trombone player. I remember back in the day when I would be transcribing your solos and trying to then figure out snippets that I could actually play on the trombone, and then look through it all and figure out what the hell you were playing, what those notes were. So it's really a treat to be able to talk to you a little about all that stuff and get some of your secrets.
Well, thank you, Michael.
So, I read recently that you originally were kind of attracted to the trombone, and for one reason or another, they didn't have a trombone. You went with trumpet as kind of your default, and as a trombone player, I can say this. I kind of feel like you kind of, when you look back in your career, you dodged a bullet, man.
Well,
So,
I think trombones are coming to the fore the last few years of so many great young players. I'm happy to say, and I still love the trombone, and it's unusual because I love the sound of multiple trombones, like Slide Hampton's band. I'm not that thrilled with the sound of multiple trumpets in a jazz context for some reason. Still love that dark, beautiful sound of the trombone, and way in my back burner. Maybe eventually get a valve trombone. I'm home a little more now, so that's on the back burner. So it's never too late. A couple of good friends of mine play both. So,
and can you play the bigger mouthpiece?
well, that remains to be seen. I tried Alex Sipiagins. I was over his place. He's got a valve trombone, and that would take a little work. But what they all say is if you can master the mouthpiece to an extent, it helps your trumpet playing too. A couple of friends of mine have mentioned that.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with that.
All right. Well, I can't help but think Skunk Funk would have a whole different thing going on if you were playing trombone.
Yeah, that's for sure, especially the first couple times I try it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned playing phrases and listening for something that might start. Maybe take us a little bit through your writing process. So let's say you have an assignment, you've got to write some tunes, you've got a deadline. What do you do?
Well, the main thing you do is have to sit there and pray. And that's really it, because I don't have certain guys, I never really studied. There's ways you can set up grids or use mathematics, set up a tone row. But I look for phrases. I play piano. I'll play different keyboards. I'll play trumpet. I'll set up a rhythm now with the technology. But I'd start from different viewpoints. At the time I had a set. When I was writing a lot of that stuff, I had a set of drums. and I had eventually a 4-track recorder. So sometimes I set up a funk beat on drums. Sometimes I'd set up some kind of bass line on the mini Moog. I usually I use. This might be interesting to talk about the intro to Skunk Funk. It'll show you how many different instruments. The intro. I don't have my horn here, but if I sing it, most of you will recognize it. Well, every bar was a different instrument, and every bar was a singular thing. I had that was the trumpet line. I did that, like I said earlier, just kind of fooling around. That came out. I said, I'll write that one down. It's a little like Miles's Mode, one of Train's tunes, but lays well on the trumpet. So I filed that away. The da-da-da was, I also had a clavinet, and I go, like, from playing with Stevie Wonder, I played with him in '73 for about 9 months and could really see how he attacked the clavinet. So I got to be a pretty good clavinet player, and that was mostly triples. So the next line in that intro was a bar of me playing clavinet, and the third bar, the the clavinet was right on top of a suitcase model Rhodes, and that sharp 9 and that register low was very good. At one point, I played da da da, and I eventually pieced the trumpet line, the clavinet thing, and the piano thing together, fit together. So I had 3 bars. I had 3 different instruments already. And then, let's see, what's the next bar? It was something else. Oh, there was a clavinet thing, but the bit it is probably the hippest part of the intro, and that I was ping-ponging things back and forth on 2 cassette players. This was before there was all the technology, and that bit it was a bleed from something else, was an accident. And that, I said, well, that sounds good there. So now I had bit it. Then I thought, okay, sharp 9 chord. And then another trumpet line that I had laying around somewhere. Bit. And that thus was the intro, but every bar in the intro was a different idea, different instrument, different point in time that somehow I managed to fit together. And that's generally, particularly in this style of writing where you don't, it's not AABA forms where you can kind of get the A section and then come to a bridge 32. That's really how it worked. It was like putting a puzzle together in general, all the tunes.
Okay, we are ready to play. The last thing we have to do is shut this door, and that door, this door sounds something like this.